Welcome to today's Prop Academy webinar, where we will be discussing the essentials of property management. If you just arrived, you'll notice you won't have access to your mic or your camera, and that's how it should be. As long as you can hear us and see us, that's important. You can use the chat room to engage with us. Please bear with us. We know that there's a lot of attendees here, which means it could lead to a lot of questions. If we don't get to your question today, either because of relevancy or because of timing, we will reach out to you after the session because our reports allow us to see exactly who asked what, and we'll be able to reach out to you afterwards. I'm also now going to give our panelists an opportunity to properly introduce themselves. My name is Caroline. I'll be the facilitator of today's session, but most importantly, I'd like to introduce you to our subject matter experts. And I think, Courtney, maybe we can start with you, and then you can hand over to Charlene or Rensha.
Perfect. Every time I think I'm going to get out of this, but here I am.
Nope.
Okay, everybody, my name is Courtney from Prop Academy, and I, along with the assistance of Caroline at CTU, we put topics like this together based on your demand. So Prop Academy, online training provider, but I'm sure loads of you know that because I can see our learners in this chat. So that's awesome that you've joined us. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass over to Rensha de Beer to introduce herself.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Yes, Rensha de Beer. I'm also part of the team in managing, and I share today with you not to train, but really to share challenges that we also experience. I'm from Property Management Ignite, Durban and North Coast, and it's always nice to share. And, you know, sometimes we forget what all these little things are that sometimes can happen and go wrong, and we just get so complacent in our management structures. So today for me is to share and highlight just some certain important things that I think could bring value to what we do every day. Thank you, Colleen.
Awesome. Charlene, over to you.
Hello, everybody. Glad to see so many of you on here. So I'm Charlene Anamolis from Property Principal Services. We are a virtual compliance support company, and we offer support and compliance. We specialize in it to the real estate industry, and I'm quite excited to be here and just to listen to what Rensha has to say as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, ladies. I think let's just jump right into it. We've got a full audience. And so what we do, this is to our audience as well, just again, use the chat room to ask any questions you might have. If we don't get to your questions, we'll get to them afterwards. We do reach out to most of our attendees, especially if you had very specific questions. Yeah, just enjoy the session. So let's just jump right into it. So I think, Rensha, I'm going to start with you. Let's talk managing agents. Is the body corporate sectional title scheme financially compliant and up to date with levies, budgets, and reserve fund requirements? You can just give us insight on that.
Thank you, Colleen. Yes, I think financial compliance is a very important aspect of a body corporate. So much as levy collections and so much as the budget and reserve fund. So I just want to break down shortly financial compliance. It's not about money, how much money we've got in the bank, are we making a surplus and not a deficit? But if you look at your audited financial statements, that's actually the key indicator of our financial compliance. And you'll note that auditors nowadays don't just audit the figures like in the olden days. They look in specific at section 21, 24, 25, and 26 of the management rules, which, for example, refer to bank accounts. A section 54.1 bank account for your administrative funds, section 54.2 for your reserve funds. They look to see if we are in fact transferring what we've allowed in our budget for reserve funds to be monthly transferred to that reserve fund. And if you're not compliant, they look at the budget, they see what amount has been made provision for, and that has to go in there. Do you have a 10-year plan? Because that is form part of it, and we'll touch on that a bit later. That's another cup of tea. But do you feed that maintenance plan? Then we have insurance valuations, which the Act requires for body corporates to reevaluate that every 3 years. And then you have fidelity insurance, which is part of that financial component, which is, again, a new regulation where we have to insure the funds for fraud, dishonesty, mismanagement, and there's certain regulations as to how to calculate it, and do you have an adequate fund. So that's just what we do in an audit for financial compliance. Levy collections, wow, what a challenge. And I think everyone can agree it has become tighter, more specialized, and to keep the demand on to constantly be on their tails. Now, there's also a process when we implement new levies. You have to notify the owners within 14 days. When you had that AGM with a formal notification from the Board of Trustees, we put it in a resolution to notify them of, that's in section 25(1), as to what levy is payable, how it's payable. Obviously, we all think and we assume levies are payable on a monthly basis, but not necessarily. You get certain estates and homeowners associations, which they have to pay the levies annually by March if the financial year, for instance, is January to December. The obligation to pay in advance will then put there. Then the next point is interest. What interest may the body corporate charge? And that's regulated at its max of the National Credit Act. So body corporates can't go and be cowboys and charge them a high amount of interest. And the most important thing that has to form part of that resolution in terms of the interest is compounded. If that word compounded is not in your resolution and we go to court one day and the judge asks, break it down, how much levies, how much interest, legal fees, and you have not, and you have to provide that resolution as well, and it doesn't include compounded, he can throw the whole thing out because you've gone and you use compounded, but your resolutions is not talking about that. Legal action if a person doesn't pay. Eventually, you have to hand over to an attorney, and then again, that resolution must include it, and the Act prescribe you have to give the person 14 days notice. And you can't just add it to the levy account unless the owner agrees that, yes, I know I've got legal fees, yes, you can add it. We have to create a separate T account, as we call it, to then charge him for his legal fees. When you charge him also for legal fees, he's liable for all collection fees and any other attorney collection charges. I have to also point out, we as managing agents, our duty is, yes, we've got to collect levies. We send the accounts, now the person goes in arrears. What do? We do reminders for arrear levies. And ultimately, when you collect arrear levies, what do? You collect debt. So you, in terms of the Council of Debt Collectors, qualify us then, or we are debt collectors. So it's advisable, if you do that, that you register with the Council of Debt Collectors, or maybe engage with them and ask him to give you clarity on it. But I can assure you it is a requirement. The moment you charge for sending an SMS or a letter of demand or any processes that you do in recovering of the debt, you have to be registered with the Council of Debt Collectors, and they also have a prescribed set of fee structure that is gazetted, like attorneys are bound to work within fee structures. And then the last point on that is budgeting and your reserve fund. Now we know a budget is, your budget is based on your expenditure. And you have to have income that balance out on that. And that equals levies. What is a levy? A levy has two legs. One is your administrative fund and one is your reserve fund. Now that administrative fund must really focus on the daily administrative operational fund expenditure. And then your MRF is the major capital expenditure, which is ultimately linked to that 10-year plan. And as I said, that requires a session on its own. Thanks, Colleen. I hope I covered all the points.
No, definitely, especially with regards to our first statement. And obviously what we're addressing, I just want to mention this to the audience, is these are our key questions that you as managing agents should be asking. So what we are going through is addressing these questions as if we're asking them ourselves. So Rincha, the next one is based on general meetings. So have all the required annual and special general meetings been held, and were they properly documented through minutes? So if you can elaborate a bit on that.
All right, I think the first thing we need to do when we're going to have an AGM is we need to look at the deadline and the notice periods that's linked to it. Now, when you have a normal AGM, I'm not talking SGMs and unanimous resolutions and all that as yet, but when we have an AGM, you have to have it within 4 months of the financial year. Now, that's challenging. I'm with you guys because it's October, November, December, January. What happens in December? We all go to the beach. Auditors are not there. Staff is on either, skeleton staff and stuff, and trustees are not interested. They're kicking their shoes off, and we have a deadline to chase. So auditors are inundated now. We thought initially when the new regulation says that all new body corporates have got September year end, our auditors are going to perform well because they don't have the February year ends with all sorts of other companies and businesses to deal with. It's becoming more and more difficult for them to keep up in our demands. AGMs, 14 days notice. If you have an SGM where you pass special or unanimous resolutions, it's 30-day notice. And it's also important to understand that when you do have a notice period, that the day that the notice goes out, including the day that you have the meeting, does not form part of that 14 days. So you theoretically must work on a 16 days. What do we need for quorums? Olden days, we said sliding scale, 20 people or 50 or 100 or whatever the case may be. Now we all work on a 33.33%. Participation quota of 33% of the owners dictates whether we have a quorum or not. And if you don't, you adjourn, and next week we all come together, and whoever's present within a half an hour of that time then forms a valid quorum. SGM, also 33%. But voting structures is different. If you have an AGM with ordinary resolutions, we talk about majority rules. But if we have an SGM, then you have to have a quorum of 33%, but 75% of that quorum must vote in favor. But not just in the percentage, in the number too. The same goes for unanimous resolutions, but the quorum for a unanimous resolution at an SGM is 80% of all the owners must be present in that meeting to form that valid quorum. And it's a unanimous. What does it mean? Every person in that meeting must agree. If you reach a higher percentage than 80%, let's say you've got 95% of all the owners present, it's still unanimous. Not 80%, that's all agree, but 95%, it's all the owners present in that meeting. And obviously, whatever resolutions you require then will be counted like that. And the last point, which is different, we think there's only AGMs and SGMs. What is the third one? Is an inaugural body corporate meeting. A very important one, which I think, again, is something that we can elaborate on. I don't want to say too much, but again, yes, you have the same quorum, 33%. However, you cannot include the developer sections. So it is to make sure that there's a fair representation of the developer, of the owners in that meeting, and the developer doesn't walk in and he still owns 25% of the sections and he pulls through all the votes. We must make sure that there's at least 33% of registered owners. He is not deprived from his voting rights. Obviously, he's still got an interest. He pays a levy. So yes, just important to understand you cannot include him in the counting of the quorum. Resolutions, votings, how you do it, records of the voting results must be included in the minutes. Now, I know the Act states that the chairman has to declare the voting and the results after each point. My genade, people. How's it going to happen? I have a development of 300 units, I have 100 people sitting there, then I'm going to say to him, please go and have a cup of coffee. I'll be with you in about a half an hour. Because if you imagine, now we've got all the votes, and it's not just the number, but the PQs, and we've got 100 votes, we've got to assign all the PQs to it, and then say, okay, numbers, PQs, okay, Mr. Chair, we've passed it, now we can move on. We'll sit there for days. So I normally explain that for the owners. If we are there in person, they all got a voting card, which they tick the boxes. Our voting cards have got already the PQ, the name, etc. in it. So it makes it so much easier for the staff to then just calculate the next morning. And what we then do is we do a general letter to inform the owners the budget was approved. These were the main results of the voting, wherever the voting was required. So, yeah, that's in a nutshell.
Oh, that's perfect. You've covered all the important points we wanted there. And then, Rensha, talk to us about the 10-year maintenance plan. The question that we need to ask there is it updated, is it budgeted for, and is it being implemented correctly? If you can elaborate on that.
Preparing a 10-year maintenance plan could be a daunting task and sometimes very intimidating. I think there is still a bit of lack of knowledge to understand major capital expenditure. When you prepare this plan, you present it to the owners, you get it passed. Is it actually practical? You know, or is it just paperwork that you included in your thing and you can tick the box, yes, our 10-year plan? Do you actually look at, is the board aware of the importance of this? Because if they don't apply their mind to it, and you as the managing agent who does the finances, understand the budget, deal with the expenditure, are not going to apply your mind to execute what you plan or to make provision for where it's going, you're going to land up with nothing in the bank, and you're going to have to raise special levies if and when it is required. There are professional valuation companies, which we'd also use, especially when it's a new block. You know, it is not a normal body corporate where you have the roads and the roofs and the walls and the boundary fencing and there's a gate. Some developments have heat pumps, sewer pumps, central aircon system with huge tanks on the roof. Whose responsibility is that to maintain? Because it's not individual geysers or heat pumps in the units, but it's a central system that's on the roof feeding all those units. That has to be in your 10-year plan. And it has to be renewed every year, because a 10-year plan is a 10-year plan. And yes, we apply our minds, but movement and things happen that might not be necessary that we anticipated could happen, and then we can move it on, or something unforeseen has actually now happened in a year earlier, so you have to review it, dust it off, take this year off that's gone, water under the bridge, and let's move on and add another year to it. Work on it. I would suggest, and that's what I do, for a realistic period, I look at 5 years very intensely, because 5 years goes like this. You know that this requirement from CSOS is been gazetted 2016. It's nearly 10 years that we are working with this new regulations. It's frightening when I was actually adding up and I realized, oh my gosh, and how many people are actually actively implementing it and know how it works. Another thing that we could elaborate on at a later stage, there's a lot of financial planning. And will the minimum requirement, and we will touch on that, is how to calculate that 10-year provision into your budget. And there's a minimum requirement in 3-4 stages of a formula that you have to apply. And I believe some people still misunderstand and not interpreting the rule correctly. But even if you have the minimum in there, will it be able to service the demand of that 10-year plan? And then how must my levy support this in order, because you're pulling the plug here, it all runs out here, but you have to put something in, otherwise you're going to dry it up in 1 year. Yeah, that's the 10-year plan.
Yeah, it's a lot of planning, because initially when, body corporates are formed, us, speak out of just watching your experience, is like, I always know people are trying to save money, bring the levy down, then we can sell the development off cheaper. It's a low levy, whereas not taking into account
100%.
that planning. Yeah.
And starting off with a new development with fresh bricks out the ground, don't think you can sit back for 10 years and do nothing, or 5 years for that matter. You have to start day one. People can't understand, but why do we need a reserve fund? Because this light shouldn't break and the pipe shouldn't burst. There are certain aspects that we can go back to the developers, but we got to now get on our own feet and be realistic about it. That's what I'm saying. It has to be practical, realistic, and not just paperwork.
Absolutely. Talk to us about trustees, Rensha. What is the clear line between their roles and responsibilities and the managing agents?
Role confusion can lead to compliance risk and a huge remorse. I mean, I think if there's a confusion between the board and the managing agent in terms of whose roles and responsibility it is, whose job it is to do X, Y, and Z. Now, ultimately, we know the Act clearly states the body corporate trustees are sitting on hot chairs. They take on a huge responsibility. It's not an ego trip. It's a hot damn chair. But we as managing agents must support, must guide. We can't tell them what to do, but we have the knowledge. We work with this every day. We know where the landmines are. So be involved in that. We must guide our trustees, and both parties must realize their responsibility and to ensure that there's financial compliance, that there's transparency. You can't keep quiet because the board tells you, don't tell the owners. If that happens, you say to them, I think you need to get another managing agent. And it's happened before when you find that you do not have a good relationship, that you feel you're under pressure, don't take it. Walk away, because it's your reputation as well when everything is going to go down the drain. So due diligence on any process is also very important. And again, trustees must be actively involved in meetings, and so is us as managing agents. It's difficult for us to go to each and every meeting, but if you assist in helping them and guiding them, you don't have to sit there every time. You give them the tools, you give them the agenda, you tell them what you need, and yes, every now and then it's good to go and show face. They want to see the warm body. We all get used to the Zooms and whatever. I still find it so great to walk in, have a cup of coffee. Some of them I see once a year because they're so well managed by themselves. And we have literally a glass of wine while we have an AGM. There's nothing wrong with that. We're not getting that intoxicated not to understand what we have to do for this AGM, but it's the relationship and to understand whose roles and responsibilities is where.
And the key is to avoid that confusion, clearly.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about this insurance policies that managing agents need to be, aware of and consider. So they need to know, what are the scheme's insurance policies? Are they adequate? Are they up to date? And do the owners even understand what's covered? So if you could touch on that as well.
A very, very important point as well, because when the pawpaw hits the fan, everyone looks at the managing agent. Why? Because you didn't tell us this, or you didn't tell us that, or we're underinsured, or the public liability. It's important that you work with brokers as well as insurers that are geared up and understand what needs to be included in a sectional title, not a building contract or a commercial contract, public liability, trustee indemnity, all those bells and whistles that has to be in there. Now, if we just zoom in on the building value, that has to be looked at, presented at the AGM. We have the sum insured values, understand how those sum insured values are made up. And sometimes you find that when an owner purchases a property, he gets a bond. And what does the bondholder do? He demands that the unit must be insured for a minimum amount of X. Now, that's way over insured replacement value. But that's his demands. It's his condition. I'll give you a bond, but you have to add 500,000 to that basic sum insured, and then we'll give you the bond. So the poor owner, what does he do? You have to sign. We are then informed in order to issue an insurance clearance certificate. The transfer goes through. What do you think that then happen with our premiums? So we have a premium based on PQ, based on the basic sum insurance, everyone the same. Now there's an owner that gets added 500,000 and the total premium is going to increase. Whatever the difference is, we need to keep tab of to recover it from that owner. Now, sometimes it's 6 rand or something a month, and I'm saying, don't waste my time. 6 times 12 is X, and we explain to the owner, this is it. Or he had improvements done. He's put a brand new kitchen, marble tops, bells and whistles, cost him 200,000. Owners have to inform us. Exclusions on renewal policies. Now, there I feel the managing agent plays a huge part. I'm not an insurance broker. I don't know, but I can read. And there's a big section, exclusions. Read it. If you don't understand it, phone the broker and say, what the hell? I don't understand this. What does this mean? Because especially after the floods, you can imagine what happened in our insurance industry. Not only did the premiums go sky high, but there were specific exclusions on flooding, retaining walls, even if you've got all the stability certificates and geotechnical reports and whatever. And if that is not in place, they will not even look at it. So they have limited it. And we've had a case the other day where, for instance, we had major building work around the swimming pool. The pool was cracked. They then rebuilt it, and we said to insurance, if we prepare this, and we had to pay for it, all the body corporate paid for it themselves, we will bring you the geotechnical reports, engineer's report, to be added then into our policy for future claims. And they said, no, they can't do that now. So that's another cup of tea, which we need to go to the insurance ombudsman, because you told us that's a condition. What is the claim procedures? So we assist within our office with a dedicated person dealing with maintenance and insurance claims. And we know that's geyser. And the odd thing, you have a storm and something falls over and the resultant damage that comes with it. Owners must understand at the AGM, highlight to them, what are the geyser limits? What are your excess amount, resultant damage, or any other building damages? And then lastly, just to touch on fidelity insurance, that is also a new requirement. Well, not new, it's nearly 10 years old, like I've mentioned, is the fidelity insurance is obviously covered in either a main body, and some insurers don't do it, so we go and get another little policy on the side. There's again a formula. How much do we have to insure? How long is this piece of string that we have to now insure? So that is based on 25% of your administrative fund, plus the amount of money that's in your bank. And every year that also needs to be renewed, because what happened? The money in the bank either goes up or down, and your administrative fund, I can only imagine that goes up. And that formula gets made, we notify them, please increase our sum insured from 500,000 to 1 million or 2 million or whatever it is. It's not an expensive policy, but it has to be in, and also a point that the auditors are looking to see if it is in place and calculated correctly.
Mm-hmm. And same with the insurance policies, the managing agent should also be aware of the conduct and management rules. Are they properly filed? Are they enforceable? And have they been communicated to the owners and the tenants? If we can touch on that.
Very quickly, yes. I think let's start from the beginning. You have old buildings, 19-foot sack. Before CSOS came into play, what did we do? We send it to the deeds office in Pietermaritzburg. That's us from Durban. And they file it. What file? The bin or file or something, because 3, 5, 10 years later, sorry, with respect, we ask for a copy that is stamped and certified, because we've got a huge fight with an owner, and we said, let's start with the rules. And then they can't find it, or they do, and whatever. So, as you know, when the new act came in, we all have to register with CSOS. Each body corporate get a registration number, and the documents they ask us to then submit together with that registration were conduct rules, management rules, your levy structure, etc., etc. But now it's sent to CSOS. I think they were so overwhelmed, whether they actually pulled everyone out to see, are they good, are they fair? But only until such time when there's a huge dispute, CSOS will say, no, this rule is unfair. It's easier with new buildings because either the developer make changes and there's a process there, or once we had the AGM for new building and the sectional title was registered with prescribed rules, I will review those rules because you always have procedures and protocols and extra rules and tenants and parking, washing, all those things that you want to be more specific in your rules about. Then I will consult with the board and we will guide them in the rules that is acceptable by CSOS in terms of their directives. You know, there were old rules, we can tow a car away, slaughtering of animals, etc., etc. Those is a no, no, no. There are procedures in place which they've given us direction. So it doesn't mean that a person can do what he wants, but the finding structure must also be very much defined in your rules. Even if your old rule says, I can charge you 500 Rand because you had something hanging over the balcony, there's a process, people. CSOS will not accept it. You have to notify the person, allow him to come for an interview with the board or whoever, and then follow the process, because maybe there was an honest mistake, but that's another process.
And I think that also applies to financial records, trustee resolutions, and correspondence. They also need to be stored and shared in line with legislation. So if you can also touch on that, unless you already have.
Keeping record is another very important point. Gosh, guys, everything we do is important. And again, just merely filing a piece of paper you think is silly. And, oh, I don't need this, and we chuck it away, until the day the pauper hits the fan again. And you must make sure that it's properly filed, that it's handy. I can press a button and get it, or I can open a drawer and it's there, because you don't have to dig. You mustn't dig for things. It has to be there. Prescribed Management Rule 26.3 specifically also give us direction that we have to keep documents for 6 years. Oh gosh, my office looks like a document warehouse. And it took me a while, because I'm so paper orientated and very specific where things need to be filed, to take the flaps off and trust the clouds. You know, it took a while. It really took a while, because I said to the guys one day, even my accounting platform, my whole system is cloud-based. In days that they break into your office and they steal your server, or the computers just blow up and crash and you lost everything, I don't want to go there. And I think that made me take the flaps away and say, Rincha, wake up, wake up. You're in the new millennium. Although you're old, you have to keep up with the new technologies. It's really important. So cloud-based stuff, yes, you can create folders, you can have share docs between your staff, it just streamlines. And at the end of the day, when someone wants something, you must be able to give it to them. Transparency is a word that I also want to bring in that is very important. And owners can see that if they ask something, they get it straight away. They don't wait a week or 10 days for a copy of the last AGM minutes, just as an example. And then like when you come to a point, I'll close off on that point, is if you ever have to hand over a building, that's your reputation you hand over there. And if it's a gemors, people say, oh my gosh, did you see what we got from this agent? So you want to be professional and all those stuff. Yes, 6 years is a lot of stuff, but the main thing is your financials, your resolutions, your minutes, and any other important documents. I'm not talking about all the invoices and stuff, but even if there is a query, you're going to have it. So by having to hand over, it has to be in place. Or if you so choose to walk away and give it away, then you must also be able to give the next person a good basis to proceed, move on from there.
I like your statement of trust the clouds. I think we have a, yes, Courtney. Now, I just want to say we have a few questions in the chat already. I just want to tell our audience we're going to leave them for the end of the session, if that's okay with you. And obviously we'll address those that we definitely have time for. Rensha, the next two questions or statements are directed more towards CSOS. And I'm going to split the questions in two that agents need to think about. The first one is the body corporate registered with the CSOS and in good standing with levies and dispute protocols? Which follows with, are you prepared for a CSOS dispute or an audit if it happens tomorrow?
Yeah. Registration, as we know, all old and new body corporates has to be registered. And there's a process that follow from inception. Like I've said earlier, the developer has to register. We had a bit of a chicken and egg situation with CSOS on these new developments, because in order to register a body corporate, you've got to provide them with audited financial statements, a budget, and all the other things, minutes of meeting, a list of trustees. Now, I start a new development. I don't have financials. I don't have a board of trustees. I still haven't had the inaugural meeting. But what do we do now? Because we're forced to get it, because the attorney wants to make amendments to the conduct or the management rules. And in order for them to get the Section 10 certificate from the Ombud, they require a registration number. So which one do you want us to do first? Anyway, we've managed to overcome that. They understand the processes. So we get a temporary, or we get a number, we give it to the attorney, and they register it, and then we take it from there. It's also important, people, Cecil should give you a statement of your account. We haven't had that. I must say that in the last year, maybe two, this statement started to come through. But please check it. Check it. You have record of what you've paid and what you should have received. You pay over quarterly and annually you do your report. Ask them then to give you a statement, because I found that especially on new developments where a sectional title, the Land Surveyor General has registered the sectional plan and it's all there, but the sectional title has not been open until such time the first registration takes place. So what CSOs do is they look at the sectional title plan that we've in the meantime given them, and they use that as a starting date. I have developments that were, the sectional title plan were there by the Surveyor General 2 years before the body corporate actually came to an existence. So the next moment you get a bill of 40,000 Rand and you think, what the hell, body corporate's only 3 months old. How do you get that? So it's just something to look out for. Processing of submitting a claim is clear direction. 3 questions, and I'm just going to quickly touch on that. You have to provide them with your problem. Plain simple. What is your problem? What happened? Were there damages? Secondly, have you followed all internal processes to come to an agreement to resolve it? Now we can't. Now the oak doesn't want to talk to me. Now he puts his head in the sand, etc. And then lastly, the question is, what do you want to help you? What is it that you expect in the outcome of it? He must just fix it or get rid of the dog, that's barking my ear off. Who can claim? Owners can claim, trustees can claim, managing agents can claim. And those are the things. So the disputes are there. Are we in good standing? Annual returns is our good standing. Every quarterly, we pay our levies. At the end of the year, we submit an annual report, again, which includes our audited financial statement and a copy of your recent AGM minutes. Mm-hmm. We move on to the audit. What happens if there's a dispute and the auditing? Again, coming back to the point that your documents need to be filed properly. Because if there's a dispute, again, you can't go and dig for things. That claim form that I've referred to has the 3 sections. I normally say refer to Annexure A, Annexure B, and Annexure C in those 3 categories. And I state a paper trail, what has happened. If there's photos, you attach it. B, have we tried? Yes, here's an email. The owner says, take me to CSO if we feel like it. And we do sometimes get responses like that. And then lastly, we just want the problem to be solved. Documentation for audit to the annual returns is also within 4 months of the financial year. Yeah, so if you got those things right and your documents again is in place, there's so many procedures as you've got to write a manual to make sure. Do I do this monthly? Do I do this quarterly? And what do I do annually? And the cycle starts all over again.
And I think that kind of leads up to the next question that managing agents should be asking themselves is, are you doing the firefighting yourself? Are you handling everything yourself? Or are you actually empowering trustees and owners with the knowledge they need? Which I think is a very valuable point.
Yeah, it is. Communication, how do we say it? C, yellow pot, communication. And if you do not communicate with your board, I'm not just saying email the whole damn day, guys. It's so easy when your boss asks you, did you follow up? You say, I emailed him. I get very frustrated with that, to be honest. Very. And then these WhatsApp groups, these WhatsApp groups where they talk and you've got a WhatsApp group for gardening and cleaning and maintenance and whatever. I just say, I'm out of here. What happened to a phone? Desk phone, cell phone. Come on, guys, you're in an office. Pick up the phone. Talk to the people. Communication is the most important, extremely important part of the relationship that we have.
Constant, it's so true. It's so true.
But constant communicating and assisting and advising, that in itself is a training session. Because without realizing, when you communicate with them and you guide them, whatever, they learn from it. And they will respect and value your input. I'm not saying we've got to babysit them. It's a lot. And some of you have got 100, 400 schemes that you deal with. But it's important that you keep that part intact. Empowering the trustees and the owners with adequate knowledge.
Also find
will make your life easier.
With written communication, there's no tone. Your tone can be misunderstood so quickly. Whereas if you pick up the phone and say exactly the same thing, all of a sudden that person is responding better. They can hear your tone. In our office, we always have that rule: phones to sort it out and email to confirm the solution.
100%. You've got to keep a paper trail, unfortunately, because otherwise it becomes, he said, she said, and no, that's not what I said. Oh my gosh, I think we all had those scenarios. So like Courtney is saying, quick call, sum up the thing, yes, I can, and then a follow-up email to say, as per our discussion, you've approved that I can proceed with that. And not just to one oak, you include the entire board. No one must privately ask you to do stuff. When you respond and he privately complains, you respond and you include all the trustees and relevant parties. Keep the channels and transparency open. If an owner complains, I email the board of trustees and I include the owner. Why must I exclude them? They must see that I have acted on his request and I'm acting in his interest. I'm not just there for a board of trustees. Who pays your levy? Who pays your management fee? Not just the board of trustees. Every owner in that scheme deserves your attention and support. Thank you, Colleen.
Thank you so much. The next two questions, Charlene, is definitely for you. It's up your wheelhouse. So let me get started with this one. How does a managing agency register with the PPRA and what are the associated costs?
Okay, let me just start by saying, Rensha, that was incredible information. Thank you so much. That's good for all of us to learn that. Some good nuggets there. So in registering a managing agency with the PPRA and the associated costs, the first thing I need to mention is that as an existing managing agency, or a new one, you are required to conform to the Property Practitioners Act and register with the PPRA. You know, a point of serious consideration is that should you be operating and you're found non-compliant, that you will come under the risk of an allocated fine. And let's be honest, nobody wants that. I believe we all want to focus on harnessing business. And although the compliance side of things at times can seem quite daunting and quite overloaded, it's actually a requirement to operate effectively and within the regulations. Remember, the PPRA, the regulatory body, are here to protect the public against us, the real estate agents. We don't like to hear that, but that is the truth. Right, so I'm going to start with the costs. there are three main direct costs associated with registering your managing agency with the PPRA. The first is your name reservation cost. Currently, that sits at 300 Rand, so that's quite nominal. Then your second cost is for either a new practitioner or an existing practitioner. Now, a new practitioner registered under a managing agency sits at 3,241 Rand per FFC. For an existing practitioner, that sits at 2,768 Rand per FFC. Now, unlike a real estate FFC, where the assigned fee will differ between principal, non-principal, candidate agent, or practitioner, here in this case, the same fee is applied to directors and staff members, relevant to whether they are new or returning practitioners only. Now, the cost we're talking about may seem elevated, but it is carried over a 3-year cycle. So, in fact, it's not as high as what it actually seems. Okay, so now who needs to hold an FFC in a managing agency? Well, the simple answer is that if you are a director or a staff member, if you are dealing with the public, dealing with a trust account, loading or releasing funds, you need to hold a managing agency FFC. Very important. If you have a portfolio manager that is discussing the material values of the property with the public, this could include body corporates, perhaps service providers, discussing levies, rates, maintenance of properties, then they must hold the related managing agency FFC. You can also have a non-executive director registered in the firm, as long as they aren't dealing with the public or directly with the agents within the firm. They are able to apply for exemption from holding an FFC. However, they must still be reflected on the SIPC disclosure certificate as a non-executive. Okay, so we've spoken about the first two costs. Now, the third cost is related to a trust account and the exemption thereof. This fee is 2,000 Rand to the PPRA. Should you not want to hold a trust account, you will have to apply to the PPRA for this exemption. So the three direct costs, the first is your name reservation, then it's your practitioner FFC, new or existing, and then it's your trust account exemption fee. There are some other related items and costs when opening your agency. This includes your SIPC, trust account associated costs, and your education. So your SIPC name reservation and registration, which is a nominal amount, again, currently sits still under sort of 200 Rand. If you're holding a trust account, and you will be paying annual audit fees. And remember, anyone holding a trust account, if your trust account does not balance, you will have a problem. As a managing agent, what you can do is everybody that is corporate can hold their own trust account, and in turn, then you do not have to hold your own because you will have access to theirs. In this case, you might work this with or without the trustees.
So, in short, does a managing agency FFC then allow you to operate as a real estate agent too?
No, it doesn't. You have to hold an FFC in both. So real estate is very different to managing agent. And as soon as you're dealing in rentals, sales, or referrals, you fall into real estate agency category. If you're a managing agency, and most managing agencies do deal in rentals, let's be honest, it's a no-brainer. You've got your database already. You may as well rent them out. In fact, you should actually sell them as well, or at least refer them. So if you are renting, selling, or referring, you're going to need a real estate license FFC, as well as a managing agency FFC. Remember, for any of the specialization categories, including a managing agency, you will not need a principal. So once you decide to harness the extra business opportunity by registering a real estate FFC, then you will need a principal registered in your entity.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Courtney, that does lead to the end of our specific topics that we wanted to cover. Did you want to add anything to that before we address some of these questions?
No, that was perfectly explained. Thank you very much, Charlene. And I think Rensha can continue with some questions we've got here. We have responded to some, but as Colleen and I know, there are some extras that need to be discussed. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So everyone, we do have 5 minutes left in our session. If you are keen on just maybe staying an extra 5 minutes to get your question answered, please do so. And for those who don't have any questions or don't or are not interested in receiving the answers of the questions posted, you are welcome to leave the session. But let's get started. So the first question that was asked is from Zanele Leroux. She's about to start her own real estate agency next year. To check the viability of a body corporate's financial standing, please help if we still use the, I'm assuming, Standard Bank Hub. Just need to know where exactly we find this information.
Sorry, she's starting a new company next year. Just repeat that.
Yes.
And?
Yes, so Zanella is starting her own real estate agency next year. And she wants to know more about checking the viability of the body corporate's financial standing and if they still need to use what I'm assuming is the Standard Bank Hub. So she just needs to know where to get this information.
All right. I think if you take on a new building, a body corporate for that matter, yes, it's good to look at financials to see what is their standing, are they well managed, and it's for you to then decide, am I going to take on this can of worms, help them to resolve it, or you rather want to walk away. With regards to the bank account, like we've explained, the trust accounts that needs to be open, otherwise accounts where trustees needs to be signatures. I don't think there's a lot of agents that work with bank accounts where you have two trustees and a managing agent as a co-signature in place, and rather moved on to Standard Bank, ABSA, or Nedbank, all have a corporate account within the portfolio of the managing agent, and then you'll have your trust accounts listed under that. I hope I answered that right.
The next one is from Veronica, and I'm assuming you received this question a lot. How do you deal with tenants who never abide by the rules and the trustees and managing agents don't enforce? One of the complexes I deal with continuously have problems in this regard.
It starts with when they put their foot there or intend to come to stay in this complex, that we have a long list of do's and don'ts. And I find that introduction, we brought that into our rules, especially on my new developments where you have 100 or 300 units, and it can even apply in smaller unit developments, is that we engage with the rental agents. We actually have created an additional rule in our conduct rules that require an introduction period, requirement, where we meet with the agent, we meet with the tenant, we provide a copy of the conduct rules, we give them a copy of the parking allocations, so that there's no confusion the day that he drives with his truck into that development, that he does not know and cannot say, oh, but the agent or the owner didn't tell me this or tell me that. You'll find that if you put that in process prior to them moving in, you resolve 9 out of 10 disputes, and everyone is happy and understand how it works there, what you're allowed to do and not to do there. Also, with that whole introduction process, we provide a moving in and out form. You know, nowadays security needs to be tightened up, access control keys and passwords are getting sent on. And in previously, the truck arrives, the man opens the gate because he's here to move in furniture. In the meantime, they've sussed out the place that there's a unit that is furnished but has been empty because the owner's overseas, and the next moment the truck drives out and security says, have a nice day, and the owner gets home and his unit is empty. So there's very specific procedures in place for moving in and out. If the truck arrives and security is not being pre-informed of the moving in, that truck must idle there until they follow the process. But yeah, rules and regulations and introduction to tenants for it will solve your problem.
Fantastic. I think, Veronica, I hope that answers your question. Nick is asking, what are the risks and benefits for taking or not taking liability insurance for trustees of a homeowners association? And is this trustee liability insurance a requirement or a choice of the homeowners association?
It's a requirement. It has to be in the policy, not a choice. It's not a choice whether you want or not. It's a requirement. It has to be in there.
Right. So that's Nick's question. Let me just scroll down. I think we had a few random notes also giving us notifications. Okay, Lance. I think his question is based on when we discussed documents that need to be filed in the cloud. So he says, thank you, Rensha. Is there any issue with documents being lost in the cloud and our accountability? Do we still need it filed in hard copy as well?
Well, yes, you see, that was my scary moment as well. What if there's a Donnerstorm out there and that cloud bursts? So it is scary. You got to make sure that you do collaborate or sign up with a very safe cloud. I have a backup system as well. There are certain documents. I have a storeroom and I keep them for 6 years. Very important documents that I feel are the most important. I mean, bank statements, if you have large developments, can be boxes and boxes full of files. We have developments where there's a little body corporate on the development. I would then keep 2 years by myself and give them 4 years. Next year, they throw a box away and I can shift on just to have some of it here. Otherwise, at the development. And you then, for your own safety, if you're not very trustworthy on your cloud, and it does happen, people, it does, make sure that you have a backup. Either store it, save it in an external hard drive. These things get very big nowadays, megabytes, terabytes, and all those things that you can store quite a lot, even if you have to buy an external hard drive for each body corporate, just to have at least the main important documents for 6 years in there.
Yeah, if I can add to that, Rensha, just from experience with our own business, Lance, the cloud is one of the safest ways to store your files, especially if you have a good technology that you're using. One of the main reasons cloud documents in the cloud get lost is because of human error or because of access control. If too many people have access to the same documents, that's when there is always that risk of someone deleting a file that they shouldn't have deleted or moving a file that they shouldn't have moved. Yeah. And I think having your policies and procedures in place for how your documents are being managed, controlled, and accessed is vital. And that counts for your physical documents as well. So the risk cuts both ways.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, Shalandra has 2 questions. What happens when you don't have enough trustees? And do votes count based on the number of units owned by a party at an AGM?
Ooh, what happens if we don't have enough trustees? So there's no sliding scale of how many we need. The only thing the Act prescribes is you have to have a minimum of 2. But now you're sitting at an AGM and there's only one guy putting up his hand, or no one's putting up his hand. That's serious. I think, again, you have to go back to the owner and say, guys, I have had a situation. And I said, no one is leaving this room tonight unless I have 2 people to start the process. We will work with you. We are doing X, Y, and Z. We are not expecting you to micromanage us. We will come and sit with you, explain our processes, how we work, the reports that we're providing, and you will see you're not going to get 100 emails a day or 600 WhatsApps. Sit with us at least, commit to that, and by giving them the reassurance that we are there to work with them and take on some of their functions and their responsibilities, they sort of, because they're not quite sure what to expect. The second part was?
Do votes count based on the number of units owned by a party at an AGM?
So voting for an owner, you are voting for every section that you own. You can take up to 2 proxies or two members. So now we have a situation the other day, which was very interesting to understand, is that I'm an owner. I've received a proxy from Courtney. She has got a section. And Charlene said, I can't be there. And she owns 5 units. So it's important to understand that it's a proxy of 2 members, irrelevant the number of sections that they own. So that person can then have 7 votes from 2 people, as long as he doesn't have a proxy for more than 2 proxies. That's how you do. And it's not by number. Remember, we take the participation quota percentages to make up the voting results.
Right. Thank you so much, Rensha. I think, Courtney, because we've gone a few minutes over our time, I think we do need to conclude. I did see a few questions coming in at the end, and I think what we'll do is we'll reach out directly to these people to help them out, especially, I think, Zanele Leroux, who's asking a specific question to guide her. So I think, ladies, if that's fine with you, we're going to conclude for here. I just want to thank our attendees for your time, your patience, and your questions. I want to thank our fantastic guest speakers, Rensha, for your valuable insights, and Charlene, yours as well. We really appreciate your time and hope to collaborate with you again soon. Courts, any feedback from you to the audience, please?
No, that was so intense. Thank you so much, Rensha. I loved all of the information. It was information overload, but it was just awesome to have everything.
Yeah.
And like it was said, at least we have a recording,
Yes.
so we can go back and watch the recording, which I'm sure is super, super helpful for everyone on our podcast page, but it'll be mailed through to you in the next 2 weeks. So thank you very much, Sasha, Sasha Leroux, where the comment is coming from. I know there's a different name there, but we will respond to your question as well. So if anyone has extra questions, pop it there and we'll get back to you.
Yes.
Thank
you so much, everyone.
Mm.
Oh, excuse me,
Thank
Charlene.
you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
It was awesome chatting. And we will help where we can, Courtney.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Charlene. Thanks for your help.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Bye,
you,
everybody.
everyone.
Thanks, Colleen. You did
Bye-bye.
an amazing job again.
Goodbye,
Thank
everyone. Have a
you.
fantastic
Bye.
afternoon and weekend.
Awesome.
Thank you.